The ballroom shimmered with golden light, every chandelier blazing like a constellation suspended above polished marble floors. The Hale estate had not hosted a wedding in decades, yet tonight it pulsed with forced celebration. Champagne flutes clinked, violins played, and dozens of well-dressed guests swayed between polite laughter and whispered judgments. At the center of it all stood Richard Hale, 60 years old, tall but greying, his sharp features softened only by the years etched into his face. His tuxedo hung perfectly, tailored to hide the frailty of his aging body. Beside him, Emily, barely 25, wore white lace that trailed across the floor like spilled milk. Her hands trembled against the bouquet she clutched, though her smile did not break. The crowd applauded as they raised their glasses for the official toast. But beneath the applause lingered murmurs. 60? Can you believe it? One woman muttered behind her jeweled fan. She's younger than his daughter would have been, another whispered. Emily heard them. She lowered her gaze, cheeks flushing with embarrassment she masked as modesty. Richard, however, thrived in the spotlight. He cleared his throat, lifted his glass, and the room fell silent. To love, he declared, his voice deep, commanding, and rehearsed. To the second chances life offers us. Tonight, I stand reborn, grateful to this radiant woman who chose to share her life with me. Polite laughter filled the silence, but Emily's stomach tightened. His words felt less like affection and more like possession. She forced a smile as Richard kissed her hand dramatically, though his grip was firm, almost unyielding. The violinist struck a brighter note, and guests clapped once more. But their eyes lingered, on Emily's youth, on Richard's age, on the strange mismatch no one dared name aloud. As the newlyweds took their seats at the head tables, Miss Emily's maid of honor leaned close. "You're glowing," she whispered, though the words rang hollow. Emily's smile faltered before she hid it behind a sip of champagne. Richard, noticing her unease, placed his hand over hers. His palm was warm yet heavy, as if pinning her in place. "Don't let them bother you," he murmured, voice low enough for her ears alone. "They envy what we have." Emily nodded, though she felt no envy in the room. Only suspicion, and perhaps pity. Across the hall, Richard's oldest friend, Charles Avery, leaned toward another guest. "He's too old for this circus," he muttered, "and she doesn't look happy." The night pressed on. Toasts followed one another, but Emily barely heard them. Her mind drifted, her gaze catching reflections in the mirrored walls, a blur of strangers smiling, whispering, staring. Each glance felt like an accusation. She excused herself for air, stepping onto the terrace where cool night air swept against her flushed skin. For a brief moment, away from the music and chatter, she breathed freely. Yet even here, peace eluded her. She pulled her phone from her clutch, hands trembling as she unlocked the screen. Her thumb hovered over a contact she had sworn she would not call tonight. Her lips parted, as though words might spill out before she caught them. Behind her, the door creaked open. Richard stepped onto the terrace, his shadow stretching long under the moonlight. "There you are," he said softly, though there was a sharpness beneath his tone. "Our guests are asking for you." Emily quickly locked her phone and slipped it away. "Just needed a moment," she whispered. Richard studied her face, his eyes narrowing, searching. Then, with a smile too polished to be sincere, he offered his arm. "Come. They're waiting." She hesitated, then took his arm. Together, they re-entered the ballroom, their silhouettes framed by golden light. To the crowd, they appeared a picture of unity. Yet beneath the sheen of celebration, Emily's thoughts raced, heart pounding with secrets too dangerous to voice. The night carried on with more dancing, more laughter that failed to reach her eyes. Richard basked in admiration, retelling stories from his younger days. Emily listened, silent, the clinking of cutlery and rising chatter blurring into a suffocating hum. As midnight neared, the celebration grew louder, almost frantic, as if noise could cover unease. Emily excused herself again, this time unnoticed. She slipped through the crowd, into the shadows of the hallway leading toward the garden. Her steps quickened, her breathing shallow. She pulled her phone once more, thumb shaking as she typed. Her message was short, desperate. "I can't keep this secret much longer." She pressed send. The ballroom doors opened again. A faint breeze swept through, carrying music into the night. Emily looked over her shoulder, fear flickering in her eyes. Had anyone seen her? Back inside, Richard raised his glass once more, demanding attention with the authority of a man accustomed to it. His voice boomed, steady, but his gaze kept drifting to the empty seat beside him. "Where's the bride?" someone asked. Richard forced a smile, yet his hand tightened around the stem of his glass until it nearly cracked. The celebration continued, but unease thickened in the room like smoke no one dared acknowledge. Emily stood alone in the garden's shadows, phone pressed to her chest, waiting for a Raga's reply that would change everything. And somewhere behind the glass walls, Richard's eyes searched the crowd, suspicion already blooming like a dark seed he would not ignore. The garden lights glowed faintly against the midnight sky, strings of bulbs swaying in the breeze. Emily paced along the stone path, phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her veil trailed behind her, snagging against a rose bush, but she barely noticed. The reply she'd been waiting for finally came. A man's voice crackled on the other end, urgent, low. "You shouldn't have messaged me tonight. Do you know what you've done?" Emily's voice trembled. "I can't carry it anymore. Every smile, every touch, it feels like I'm lying. He doesn't know. And when he finds out—" "Stop." The man's tone sharpened. "If you tell him, you destroy both of us. Do you understand? This marriage was his idea, not yours. You only agreed because—" Her breath hitched. She turned toward the glowing ballroom windows, silhouettes of laughing guests blurred behind the glass. "Because I thought I could bury it," she whispered, "but it's eating me alive. I can't live like this." The man's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Then wait. Don't ruin everything tonight. Please." Emily closed her eyes, forcing back tears. The weight of her secret pressed against her chest like a stone she couldn't dislodge. She nodded silently, forgetting he couldn't see. "Just promise me this won't destroy me." The line went quiet for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried dread. "It already has." She pulled the phone from her ear, staring at the dark screen as the call ended. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glass. Pale, frightened eyes stared back at her. Unbeknownst to her, another reflection stood in the shadows beyond the terrace doors. Richard. He had followed her quietly, the weight of his suspicions hardening with every step. From behind the drapes he had caught fragments of her whispers, the words secret, destroy, and marriage. Not enough to understand, but enough to wound. Inside, the guests' row, red with laughter at a drunken toast. Yet Richard's smile was gone, replaced by a thin, rigid line. His knuckles whitened around the glass he held, champagne sloshing dangerously near the rim. Emily slipped her phone into her clutch, straightened her dress, and returned to the party. She forced her face into composure, though her eyes darted nervously toward the crowd. Richard stepped back into the light just in time to greet her, his voice warm but taut. "There you are," he said, offering his arm. "I was beginning to think you'd run away from me." A ripple of laughter from nearby guests disguised the edge in his words. Emily managed a smile, but her hand shook as she took his arm. Together they returned to the head table. The orchestra resumed, swelling with violins that seemed almost mocking in their brightness. Richard raised his glass once again, though this time his words stumbled. "To my beautiful wife," he said, voice tightening. "May she always be honest with me, as I will be with her." The guests clapped politely, unaware of the hidden barbs. Emily's face flushed as she lowered her gaze. Her fingers toyed with the rim of her glass, but she couldn't bring herself to drink. Richard's eyes lingered on her, studying every twitch, every breath, every false smile. His mind replayed her whispers, dissecting each one until paranoia began to take root. For the rest of the evening, he barely heard the music or laughter. His focus narrowed only to her. Who had she called? What could she possibly be hiding? Emily excused herself once more, claiming she needed to check her makeup. Richard let her go, though his eyes followed her until she disappeared into the corridor. When the applause swelled again, Richard did not join in. His mind turned inward, toward the locked room upstairs, the study where he kept every relic of his past. Letters, photographs, documents, pieces of history no one else was meant to see. If Emily thought she could deceive him, she was mistaken. He would remind himself of the truth he had buried there. The music played on, but Richard no longer heard it. He sat stiffly, staring at his untouched glass, the mask of a smile plastered across his face. And somewhere down the hall, Emily leaned against the bathroom sink, gripping its edges, whispering to her reflection, "What have I done?" The reception wound down near 2 in the morning. Guests, drunk on champagne and gossip, stumbled out to waiting cars. The orchestra packed their instruments, leaving silence that rang louder than any music. Emily had retreated upstairs hours earlier, claiming exhaustion. Richard stayed behind, bidding farewell to the last stragglers with a smile so polished it gleamed like glass. But once the doors shut, his smile collapsed. The house, grand and echoing, suddenly felt cavernous, every tick of the clock amplified. He lingered in the empty ballroom, eyes fixed on the half-drunk champagne flute Emily had abandoned. The lipstick print on the rim mocked him. What secret could she possibly hold from me? His jaw tightened. He could not ask her, not yet. Questions would expose his weakness, and Richard Hale did not allow weakness. Instead, he turned toward the one place he always went when paranoia clawed at him: the study. The room was hidden behind an oak door at the end of a long corridor. To others it was merely a home office, lined with shelves of leather-bound books. But Richard knew it was more: a vault of his past, a sanctuary of control. He turned the key in the lock and stepped inside. The scent of old paper and tobacco lingered, untouched by the merriment of the evening. Heavy curtains swallowed the moonlight, leaving only the desk lamp's glow to carve shadows across the room. Richard crossed to the far corner where an antique cabinet stood. Behind its false back lay a safe, its combination etched into his memory through years of obsession. He knelt, fingers trembling as he turned the dial. 36, 11, 24. The click of the lock was sharp, final. Inside lay the fragments of a life meticulously documented. Letters yellowed with age, photographs curled at the edges, official documents bound with fraying ribbon. Richard withdrew them one by one, placing them carefully on the desk. A photograph caught his eye first. It was faded, taken decades earlier. Himself as a younger man, standing beside a woman with dark hair and striking eyes. Her name rose unbidden to his lips. Clara. Emily's late mother. He stared at Clara's smile, so similar to Emily's that the two faces blurred in his mind. The memory of Clara returned like a ghost. Their affair, the passion, the shame when it ended abruptly. Clara had vanished from his life, carrying secrets he never fully uncovered. Richard's hand shook as he picked up a letter, written in Clara's looping script. You must never tell him. If he knew, it would ruin everything. The words burned in his mind. He had read them countless times, but tonight they carried new weight. The whispers Emily made outside, her mention of secrets, her desperation, it all pointed back to Clara. Could Emily know? Could she have discovered what her mother once concealed? Another photograph slipped from the bundle. This one showed Clara holding a child, Emily, barely a toddler, with the same wide eyes and uncertain smile. Richard's throat tightened. The resemblance was undeniable. He sank into his leather chair, gripping the photo until his knuckles whitened. The study seemed to close in on him, shadows pressing from every corner. He poured himself a glass of scotch, downing it in one swallow, as if alcohol could drown the thought clawing at his mind. What if Emily is more connected to me than she realizes? The notion twisted between dread and obsession. If true, it would explain her nervousness, her hesitation, her whispers in the garden. Yet it also threatened to unravel the foundation of their marriage. A secret like that could not remain buried forever. He shuffled through more documents, legal papers, property records, old correspondence. Each piece tied him back to Clara in ways he had long tried to forget. Each piece reminded him of how power and desire had shaped his life, even when it meant manipulating others. Control had always been Richard's shield. Without it, he was vulnerable. And tonight, for the first time in years, he felt that shield cracking. He poured another glass, slower this time, and stared into the amber liquid. The house was silent, but his mind roared. Emily's voice echoed. "I can't keep the secret much longer." The words replayed until they became unbearable. He slammed the glass against the desk, shards scattering like accusations. His breathing quickened, chest heaving with the weight of betrayal he had not yet confirmed. Richard Lee leaned back, rubbing his temples. His thoughts spiraled, bouncing between past and present. Clara's face, Emily's trembling hands, the whispers he caught. The possibility that his new bride carried not just love but danger, a truth capable of destroying him. A knock sounded faintly down the hall. Richard froze, every muscle tense, but the sound did not return. Likely the house staff, finishing cleanup, unaware of the storm raging in their employer's mind. He gathered the documents into a neat pile, though his hands trembled. With deliberate care, he locked them back into the safe, spinning the dial until the click sealed them away. Yet the truth could not be sealed. It had already seeped back into his life, through Emily's nervous eyes and Clara's ghost lingering in every letter. As he extinguished the lamp, the room sank into darkness. He stood in the doorway, listening to the silence of the mansion. Somewhere above, in the bridal suite, Emily slept, or pretended to. Richard closed the study door behind him, slipping the key into his pocket. His expression was cold, calculating, a mask stretched thin over turmoil. Tomorrow, he decided, he would watch her more closely. If she thought she could hide something from him, she was mistaken. And yet, as he ascended the stairs, a darker thought stirred. What if the secret she carried was the same one that had haunted him all these years? The question festered in his mind, unanswered, pulling him closer to the confrontation that awaited. The Hale mansion had finally settled into uneasy quiet. Most of the guests had departed, leaving behind half-empty glasses and wilting flowers. A few stragglers lingered near the bar, their laughter brittle with exhaustion. Upstairs, Emily slipped into the hallway, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She told herself she was only going to fetch a shawl from her room. In truth, she needed space. Space to breathe, to think, to stop hearing her mother's voice echoing in her head. As she rounded the corner near the back staircase, a figure stepped from the shadows. She froze. "Emily!" Her heart jolted. Daniel. He looked out of place in his wrinkled shirt and loosened tie, younger than Richard, yet older than the carefree boy she remembered. His eyes burned with urgency. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, glancing over her shoulder. "You weren't invited." "I know," he said, voice low. "I couldn't stay away. I had to see you. I had to make sure. Daniel, stop!" She raised a hand, trembling. "If Richard finds you here—" "Then let him," Daniel snapped. "Let him know the truth you're too afraid to say." Emily's chest tightened. She pressed herself against the wall, whispering fiercely, "Not here. Not tonight." Daniel stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "You think you can keep this buried forever? You're living in his house, wearing his ring. Every lie will strangle you until there's nothing left." Her eyes glistened. "I didn't want this. You know that." "I do," he said, softer now. "Which is why you have to tell him. Before he finds out another way. Before it destroys you both." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand what he's capable of." From the far end of the corridor, hidden behind a half-open door, Richard's figure loomed in silence. He had followed her again, suspicion pulling him like a leash. He caught fragments of their voices, Emily's desperation, Daniel's insistence, words like truth and destroy. Though muffled, they cut deep, each syllable confirming what he already feared. Emily was hiding something from him, and Daniel was part of it. His hand tightened around the doorknob until the metal bit into his palm. Back in the hallway, Emily pressed her forehead into her hands. "Daniel, please, I can't. If he ever knew—" "He deserves to know," Daniel said firmly. "But more than that, you deserve freedom. Stop letting his shadow control your life. Tell him before it's too late." Emily's breath shuddered. Tears slipped down her cheeks, darkening the lace of her sleeve. For a moment, she looked like the child Daniel once comforted, not the bride standing in silk and pearls. Her voice broke. "If I tell him, it won't just ruin me. It will ruin everything." Daniel reached for her hand, but she pulled away, retreating toward the staircase. "Go," she whispered fiercely, "before he sees you." His jaw clenched, but he obeyed, vanishing into the back exit like a shadow. Emily lingered only a moment longer, collecting herself, wiping the tears from her face. Then she straightened her gown, smoothed her hair, and walked toward the bridal suite. Richard slipped silently back into the darkness, retreating before she could catch him watching. His face was stone, but his thoughts churned like fire. The truth. The secret. "Daniel, what have you hidden from me, Emily?" The mansion seemed to close in around him as he turned back toward the staircase. Whatever his bride was hiding, he would uncover it. He would tear it from her lips if he had to. The study's documents had planted the first seed of dread. Emily's whispered conversation had watered it. Now suspicion had taken root, and Richard Hale would not rest until he knew the full truth. The house was quieter now, though not truly quiet. A few of Richard's business associates lingered in the drawing room, laughing too loudly as if trying to drown out the unease of the evening. The staff moved like shadows, clearing glasses and wiping spills, pretending not to notice the undercurrents swirling through the celebration. Emily stood frozen at the end of the hallway, her chest rising and falling too quickly. Daniel's words still clung to her ears like frost. "You have to tell him. He deserves to know." His urgency had rattled her, but it was the tone, pained, almost desperate, that shook her most. From the study doorway, Richard watched. He had heard only shards of their conversation. His name, her mother, the insistence of some truth hidden too long. He did not yet understand, but suspicion grew like a flame in his gut. His jaw clenched as Emily turned away from Daniel and caught sight of her husband. "Richard," she said quickly, forcing brightness into her voice. "I was just... Daniel and I were catching up. It's been years." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You can't keep pretending, Emily. Not tonight. Not anymore." Richard's expression shifted, subtle but dangerous. The mask of gracious host slipped, revealing something colder beneath. Pretending about what, exactly? His voice carried softly, yet with a weight that pressed against them both. Emily shook her head. Please, not here. Not in front of everyone. Then where? Richard asked, stepping closer, lowering his tone so only the three of them could hear. In my house, whispers don't stay whispers. They rot the walls. The words made Emily's throat tighten. Daniel, however, did not flinch. He leaned forward, almost daring Richard. She knows. And deep down, so do you. That marriage toast you made tonight, it was a performance. You're celebrating something built on lies. Richard's gaze snapped to Emily. H. Her lips trembled, her hands twisting at her sides. Silence stretched long enough for the laughter from the drawing room to feel grotesque in contrast. Finally, Emily whispered, Richard, my mother. You knew her, didn't you? The question pierced the air like broken glass. Richard's mind faltered, the careful order of his memories scrambling. He swallowed hard, voice steady only by force. I knew many women. That was another life. Daniel's voice dropped, sharp and deliberate. But not just any woman. Margaret Collins, Emily's mother. Tell me I'm wrong. At the name, Richard stiffened. A slow exhale betrayed him. He looked at Emily, his bride, and in her eyes he suddenly saw echoes of someone long gone. Margaret's soft gaze, her hesitant smile, her defiance when cornered. Emily's face paled as realization crept over her. So it's true, she breathed. You were with her. Richard turned away as though the walls might absorb him. His hands shook, fists tightening until his knuckles whitened. It was decades ago, before you were even born. But not before I was born, Emily said, voice breaking. The hallway seemed to shrink around them. For years she had grown up with half-stories, fragmented confessions from a mother who had been fragile, secretive, weighed down by regrets. Emily had dismissed them as the melancholy ramblings of a woman battling her own demons. But tonight, those fragments assembled into something undeniable. Richard spoke carefully, yet his tone betrayed strain. Margaret and I, we had an affair. Brief, reckless. We ended it. She left, and I never saw her again. Not never, Daniel muttered. His gaze flicked between them. She told me once, before she died, that she carried something she could never speak aloud. She was terrified it would destroy you both. Emily's stomach twisted. Something she could never speak aloud? She already feared the answer, yet had to hear it. Daniel's voice softened. She wondered if you were his. The floor dropped from beneath her. Emily staggered back, her vision blurring. No. Her breath came shallow, her mind rejecting the possibility even as every piece of her body screamed, it might be true. Richard moved forward instinctively, reaching for her hand, but she recoiled, as though his touch might burn her. Don't, she whispered. Don't you dare. The image of their wedding, the grand toast, the applause, it all fractured like a cruel joke. The whispers she had, endured tonight, weren't just about age or scandal. They had been blind to the darker truth, a truth buried beneath years of silence. Richard's composure cracked. For the first time that night he looked not like a man in control, but like someone cornered by the past. His eyes pleaded with her. Emily, I don't know. I never knew. Margaret disappeared. I didn't even know she'd had a child. But you suspected, Daniel accused. You always suspected. That's why you kept looking at her, isn't it? That's why you wanted this marriage, because deep down you already feared what it might mean. Richard turned on him, fury igniting. You think you understand me? You know nothing of the choices I made, the sacrifices. Sacrifices? Emily cut in, her voice rising. "You've dragged me into a nightmare. You stood there today, raising a glass, smiling at the world, while knowing you might be binding me to something unspeakable." Tears streaked her face. Her dress, once radiant under the chandeliers, now felt like a shroud. She could not breathe. Richard stepped toward her again, but the distance between them had grown unbridgeable. "I wanted to protect you," he insisted. "To protect both of us. The past is messy, but it doesn't have to define." "It already has," Emily said, her voice trembling but firm. "Every step of this night, every vow, every kiss, it's poisoned." The sound of laughter from the drawing room floated down the hall once more, grotesquely cheerful. It underscored the silence that followed her words. Daniel placed a steadying hand on Emily's arm. "You don't have to face this alone." Emily pulled in a shaky breath, her eyes locked on Richard's. For the first time, she saw him not as her powerful older husband, but as a man shackled by secrets he had never truly buried. The weight of betrayal pressed down on them all. The celebration was finished, though the night was far from over. For in the shadows of the grand estate, truth had cracked open. But the consequences were only beginning to unfold. The silence that followed Daniel's revelation lingered like smoke, thick and suffocating. Emily stood trembling at the edge of the hall, her gown rustling with each shallow breath. Behind her, the faint laughter of the remaining guests still echoed through the drawing room, jarringly out of place. She fixed her gaze on Richard, her voice sharper than it had ever been. "You stood there tonight, celebrating our future, knowing it might all be a lie. How could you?" Richard's face tightened. He was a man accustomed to control, to bending circumstances until they favored him. But now the polished veneer had cracked, exposing something raw beneath. "Emily," he began softly, almost pleading, "I never knew for certain. I didn't want to believe it. And when I met you, when I saw you—" Emily cut him off with a bitter laugh. "When you saw me, you saw her. That's what this has been, hasn't it? A ghost of Margaret dressed up in silk and lace." Richard flinched, her words striking deeper than he expected. He took a step forward, but Emily raised a hand, commanding distance. For once he obeyed. "All those looks," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "The way you hovered, the way you steered me into this marriage. It wasn't love. It was obsession. You wanted to cage me, to own me, just like you couldn't own her." Richard's eyes darkened. "That's not true." "Yes, it is," Emily snapped. "You wanted control. You always do. Even tonight, when the whispers grew too loud, you smiled as if you held every secret in the room. But you didn't, because this secret owns you." His hands trembled at his sides, betraying the calm he tried to project. "Emily, listen to me. Whatever happened in the past, it doesn't change what we have now. We are married. That bond means something." She stared at him, incredulous. "Bond?" Her voice cracked, then hardened again. "Do you think I'm blind? You built this entire night on manipulation. You charmed my father with promises of security, dazzled me with your wealth, and now I see the truth. You were never offering a future. You were recreating your past." Her words landed like blows. Richard's shoulders sagged for a moment, but then he tried to recover, forcing himself upright. "You don't understand," he said, voice low. "I needed you. You're the only one who makes me feel like I can rewrite everything I lost." Emily felt her stomach twist with disgust. "Rewrite?" she repeated. "You can't rewrite blood. You can't rewrite betrayal. You certainly can't rewrite me." Daniel shifted beside her, silent but resolute, his presence a reminder she wasn't alone. Encouraged, Emily took a step closer to Richard, her chin lifting. "Here's what you will understand. I will not be your substitute. I will not be your prisoner. If you think this marriage binds me to you, you're wrong." Richard's fragile composure faltered, his mask crumbling piece by piece. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You would leave me? After everything?" "Yes," Emily answered, steady now, her strength rising with each word. "I'll leave. And I'll expose the truth. Every letter you kept locked away, every photograph, every sordid connection. You think those secrets are safe in your study? They're not. The world will know exactly what you've done." The threat hung in the air like a blade. For the first time, Richard looked truly afraid. His empire, his reputation, his carefully curated image, all could be destroyed with a whisper of scandal. Emily's eyes burned with tears, but her voice was unyielding. "You built this marriage on power, Richard. But tonight, you lose it. I will not live as a shadow of my mother, and I will not be a pawn in your obsession." Richard's breath came ragged, the walls of his world closing in. He reached for her once more, desperation etched in every line of his face. But Emily stepped back, shaking her head. "Don't," she said coldly. "The only thing you should hold on to now is the truth, and it's slipping through your fingers." The faint hum of conversation from the other room faded, as if the house itself was listening. Richard stood trembling, undone by the force of her defiance. Emily, for the first time since the vows, felt the power shift. She turned slightly toward Daniel, drawing strength from his steady presence. The night was not over, but the battle had begun. And somewhere deep in the house, behind the locked doors of Richard's study, the past waited to erupt, threatening to turn their revolt into ruin. The house seemed to shift after Emily's words, as though her defiance had stripped it of warmth and ceremony. The chandeliers no longer glittered. Their light was harsh, exposing every flaw in the marble, every shadow in the corners. Richard walked the halls alone, his footsteps echoing against the silence. Emily had gone upstairs with Daniel's help, refusing to look at him again. The rejection festered inside Richard like acid, eating through every layer of pride he had once worn so easily. He drifted into the study, his sanctuary and prison. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of old paper and whiskey. He poured himself a drink, then another, the amber liquid shaking in his hand as he lifted it to his lips. "She doesn't understand," he muttered to himself, staring at the dark pane of the window. His reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, older than he remembered. She wasn't supposed to know. Not like this. The first glass went down too fast, burning his throat. The second dulled the edge of panic. By the third, words tumbled freely from his mouth, as if the room demanded confessions. "She looks just like you, Margaret," he whispered into the empty air. "The way you laughed, the way you carried yourself. She was meant to remind me of you, not punish me." He stumbled toward the desk, pulling open the bottom drawer. The letters lay bundled in yellowed envelopes, their corners worn from decades of handling. His trembling hands scattered them across the blotter like fallen leaves. He picked one up and read aloud in a slurred voice. "Richard, we cannot continue. If the truth were ever known, it would destroy us both." The words blurred, but he knew them by heart. Margaret's handwriting, looping and graceful, cut through him like glass. He pressed the letter to his forehead, eyes squeezed shut. "You left me with nothing," he said bitterly. "You ran, and now she... Your Utter, your child, stands here looking at me like I'm some monster." He slammed his fist on the desk, rattling the whiskey glass. The mansion groaned around him, settling in the night, but to Richard it sounded like whispers. He turned sharply, convinced someone was in the hall. Nothing. Just shadows stretching across the Persian rug. Paranoia gnawed at him. He imagined Daniel lurking nearby, conspiring with Emily, ready to drag his reputation through the mud. He imagined the guests, already gossiping, turning the Hale name into a scandal. He imagined Margaret herself, watching him from beyond, condemning him for the choices that had led to this unholy night. He staggered to the bookshelves, pressing his palm against the spines as if they could steady him. "I did it for love," he rasped. "For devotion. For the chance to be whole again." But his own voice betrayed him, echoing hollow in the cavernous room. He wasn't whole. He hadn't been for decades. And now, in marrying Emily, he had sealed his ruin. The whiskey deepened its hold. He sank into the leather chair, letters crumpled in his lap. His thoughts swirled in disjointed fragments. Wedding vows, Margaret's smile, Emily's tears, Daniel's accusatory eyes. "They want to take her from me," he whispered hoarsely. "They want to turn her against me. But she's mine. Mine to protect. Mine to keep." The word mine hung in the air, but instead of power, it carried desperation. His hands shook so violently he spilled the glass, the whiskey soaking the letters. Ink bled, spreading like veins across the paper. He stared at the stains as though they were blood. "No," he muttered, clutching the ruined pages. "Not again. I won't lose her too. I won't." He pressed his head into his hands, rocking back and forth. The grand, unshakable Richard Hale was gone. What remained was a broken man, haunted by the ghosts of choices he could never undo. Somewhere upstairs a door closed softly. Richard lifted his head, eyes darting. His pulse quickened. Was it Emily, Daniel, or Margaret's spirit pacing the halls to watch him unravel? The house offered no answers, only silence, punctuated by the sound of his shallow breathing. Slowly, he rose from the chair, letters clutched tight in his fist. He moved toward the window, staring out into the moonlit garden. The night stretched endless before him, yet he felt trapped, caged inside walls that now mocked him. His reflection in the glass stared back, an aging man, wild-eyed, broken. He didn't recognize the figure. Richard Hale had spent a lifetime controlling his story, his reputation, his legacy. But tonight, in the still hours after midnight, the story had slipped from his grasp, and the ending, he feared, would not be his to write. The clock in the study struck 3, its chime reverberating through the mansion's hollow halls. Richard jolted upright in his chair, the bundle of ruined letters clutched tight in his hand. His head swam with whiskey and regret, but beneath the haze, a single thought pulsed steady and poisonous. She's going to leave me. She's going to expose everything. Stumbling to his feet, he shoved the letters into his jacket pocket, as if carrying the past would somehow make it less likely to vanish. His reflection in the study window glared back, older, weaker, a man unmoored. He turned away sharply, crossing the corridor with heavy steps. Upstairs, the house lay in fragile silence. Only the faint creak of floorboards marked his progress as he climbed. The bridal suite glowed faintly at the end of the hall, a sliver of lamplight spilling beneath the door. He paused there, his hand hovering over the knob. For a moment, he considered retreating, burying his shame back in the whiskey bottle. But Emily's voice drifted through the door, soft but determined, speaking to no one, perhaps herself. "Tomorrow I leave. Tomorrow, the truth comes out." The words sliced through him. Rage and despair coiled inside his chest until he thought it might split him open. Slowly, deliberately, he turned the knob and stepped inside. Emily stood near the vanity, her gown still on, though wrinkled and weary from the night's chaos. Her eyes widened as she saw him. "Richard!" Her tone was flat, not fearful, resigned. He closed the door behind him, the click echoing like a sentence passed. "You were going to run," he said. His voice was low, brittle. "You were going to destroy me." Emily drew a steady breath. I was going to free myself. This marriage was never about love. You used me to rewrite your past, to replace her. I won't live like that." Her words landed like stones. Richard's hands shook, his face twitching as though pulled between anger and grief. "I gave you everything," he said, his voice rising. "I gave you a home, security, a future, and in return, you would brand me a monster." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice stayed firm. "You branded yourself, Richard, by marrying me when you knew what you knew, by trying to control me instead of loving me." He stepped closer, his breath ragged. "You don't understand. I couldn't lose you. Not like I lost her. You were all I had left." Her tears spilled over, but she did not back away. "I'm not her. I'm not your possession. And if you loved me at all, you would have let me go." The silence that followed was unbearable. Richard's mind raced, fractured images flashing. Margaret's smile, Emily's defiance, Daniel's accusations, the gossiping crowd. His chest heaved as his world collapsed around him. His hand moved instinctively to the drawer of the bedside table, where he had hidden a revolver earlier in the evening. Emily's breath caught as he pulled it free, the cold steel glinting in the lamplight. "Richard," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't." He lifted the gun, his hands trembling so violently the barrel wavered. "If I can't have you, no one will," he said, the words dripping with both love and madness. Emily's voice cracked with desperation. "You don't want this. You'll ruin everything. Your name, your soul. You'll lose me forever." He shook his head violently. "I've already lost you." The room closed in around them, thick with terror and grief. Emily took one final step forward, her eyes locked on his. "Then at least let me go alive." For an instant, his resolve faltered. His arm lowered slightly, and his face contorted with agony. The man who once stood as a pillar of control looked broken, pleading, undone. But the moment passed. The rage returned, swift and blinding. With a guttural cry, he raised the gun once more and pulled the trigger. The blast shattered the silence, echoing through the mansion like a curse. Emily staggered back, eyes wide, crimson blooming across her go. "Won't!" she gasped, reaching for the vanity as her knees buckled. Richard dropped the revolver as though it had burned him. It clattered to the floor, spinning before coming to rest in the dreadful silence. Emily collapsed, her wedding dress pooling around her, the white silk now streaked with red. Her breaths came shallow, fading quickly, her gaze unfocused yet hauntingly calm. Richard fell to his knees beside her, clutching her limp hand. "Emily, please." His voice cracked, breaking into sobs. "I didn't mean. I only wanted." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. A final tear slid down her cheek before her chest stilled. The silence that followed was suffocating. The house seemed to hold its breath, the echoes of the shot lingering like ghosts. Richard bent over her body, rocking, weeping, whispering apologies that would never be heard. Around them, the remnants of celebration, the flowers, the champagne, the vows spoken hours earlier, lay mocked by the tragedy that had unfolded. Down the hall, Daniel's hurried footsteps approached, drawn by the sound. But before he reached the door, Richard lifted his blood-stained hands to his face, staring in disbelief at what he had done. The man who sought to control every outcome had finally lost control entirely. The night ended in silence, broken only by the faint creak of the bridal suite door opening, and the sight of Emily's lifeless body in a dress no longer white. The silence after the gunshot lingered like smoke trapped in the bridal suite's heavy drapes. Hours later, it was broken by the whine of sirens cutting through the midnight fog. Blue and red lights washed over the mansion's facade, painting the grand stone pillars in ghostly hues. The house, once a symbol of wealth and prestige, now stood as a mausoleum of secrets. Detectives entered with deliberate steps, their boots echoing against the marble floor. The air inside was still thick with gunpowder, mingled with the faint sweetness of roses scattered from the day's ceremony. Upstairs, in the bridal chamber, Emily's body lay across the bed. The white silk of her wedding gown had become a cruel canvas, crimson stains spreading like ink across lace. Neighbours huddled outside behind the police tape, their whispers weaving speculation into the night. One woman, wrapped in a shawl, swore she had heard a scream just before the gunshot. Another insisted she had seen Emily at the window, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. None could agree on the exact sequence of events, but all agreed on the sound that followed, a single final shot that silenced the house. Detective Harris, a man seasoned by years of unraveling human darkness, stood over Richard, who sat slumped in a chair near the vanity. His suit was rumpled, his tie torn loose, his face blank except for the tremor of his lower lip. A tumbler of whiskey still sat half full on the dresser, beside a revolver lying cold and spent. "Richard Langford," Harris said evenly. "You'll need to come with us." Richard did not resist. His hands, once symbols of control and command, now hung limp as officers bound them with cuffs. He barely seemed to notice the metal tightening against his wrists. His eyes, glazed and hollow, drifted to the bed. For a fleeting second, something cracked in his expression. Sorrow, disbelief, or perhaps pride, twisted into grief. Then it vanished, replaced with an eerie calm. The forensic team moved quietly, photographing, collecting, documenting. A gloved hand lifted Emily's veil, now clinging to her cheek with blood. Her face, serene in death, still bore the faint impression of tears. The scene was ritualistic, almost ceremonial, as though the marriage had demanded this price from the start. Downstairs, Harris questioned the staff who had remained hidden during the chaos. They spoke in hushed tones, describing the growing tension between the couple, the arguments muffled behind closed doors, the unease that had settled over the mansion like an invisible weight. Each word painted a portrait not of romance, but of obsession, fear, and manipulation. As Richard was escorted out through the grand doors, the crowd of onlookers leaned forward, eager for a glimpse. He did not fight or shout. He walked with the stillness of a man whose fate was already sealed. His eyes, cast downward, seemed to study the steps beneath his feet, as though each one led deeper into a grave he had dug himself long before tonight. Behind him, the stretcher emerged. Emily's body, shrouded in white, was carried gently past the flashing lights. The lace of her gown trailed from beneath the sheet, stained dark with blood that no one could wash away. A hush fell over the neighbours. The night, once restless with gossip, grew reverent in the presence of her silence. Detective Harris lit a cigarette, his gaze fixed on the departing ambulance. Something about Richard's composure unsettled him. There was no hysteria, no denial, no plea for forgiveness. Just an unnatural stillness, as though the man had found peace in destruction. Harris exhaled smoke and muttered under his breath, "This isn't over." And deep inside the mansion, the echoes of that final scream seemed to linger, trapped within the walls, waiting to tell their story to whoever dared listen next. The trial was swift, but the shadow it cast lingered like a storm cloud over the Langford name. Newspapers devoured the scandal, printing Emily's photograph beside headlines that spoke of betrayal and blood. Richard, once a man of status and influence, was reduced to an inmate number stitched on coarse grey fabric. The mansion stood locked and empty, its grandeur now a monument to ruin. Inside prison walls, Richard carried himself with the same eerie calm he had shown on the night of Emily's death. He did not lash out, nor did he beg. Instead he withdrew, speaking only when pressed. Guards whispered that he stared at the ceiling for hours, as if tracing invisible patterns no one else could see. Other inmates kept their distance, unnerved by his silence. One afternoon, Detective Harris was granted an interview. The room was small, with cinder-block walls and a single metal table between them. Richard sat with shackled hands, his posture erect, his expression unreadable. Harris studied him, searching for cracks in the mask. "Why did you do it?" Harris asked at last, his voice low but firm. Richard's lips curved into the faintest smile, though it held no warmth. "You think I planned it, don't you?" he said. "But what is a plan, detective? A choice laid out step by step? Or is it simply inevitability wearing a disguise?" Harris leaned forward. "Emily didn't deserve what happened to her. She trusted you." Richard's eyes flickered, and for the first time, emotion bled through. Regret, rage, perhaps both. He pressed his shackled hands flat on the table. "She wanted freedom. I gave her permanence. Isn't that what vows are for? Till death do us part." Harris felt a chill settle in his bones. "You're twisting the truth, Richard. You took her choice away. That's not love. That's control." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Richard lowered his gaze. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "I didn't pull that trigger to kill her. I pulled it because I couldn't stand her leaving. In that moment, the line blurred. Love, fear, possession, they all became the same thing. It was the closest thing to a confession Harris would ever receive. Yet even here, Richard stopped short of full responsibility, cloaking guilt in riddles and half-truths. As the interview ended, Harris rose, feeling a heaviness that no verdict could lift. He left the room with the certainty that justice had been served in the eyes of the law, but not in the heart of the story. Emily's memory, however, refused to fade. Her name became a rallying cry in hushed conversations among women who saw themselves in her fate. Churches and community halls spoke of her tragedy as a warning, of love poisoned by control, of secrets festering until they devour. Parents told their daughters Emily's story, not as gossip, but as a lesson carved in pain. Back in his cell, Richard lay on his cot, staring at the cracked ceiling. The prison was loud, chains rattling, doors slamming, voices shouting. But to him, it was silent. He no longer saw walls, only the ghost of Emily's face, framed in lace, eyes wide with betrayal. He spoke to her when no one listened, words slurred with the weight of shame. At night, guards reported hearing him whisper her name, again and again, until sleep finally took him. Some swore he smiled in those moments, as though clinging to the illusion that she was still near. The cost of truth had been exacted, not only in Emily's life, but in the legacy of both families bound to ruin. Yet truth itself remained fractured, buried beneath Richard's refusal to fully own his sins. And so, even behind bars, the story did not feel finished. It lingered, restless, as though waiting for the next chapter to surface.